We'd be more
Yeah,
relaxed. We'd be
been
more.
craving some Doritos ever since then.
Oh, good afternoon. It's August 13th. Welcome to the Public Works and Finance Regular Committee meeting. We'll get started with our first item, which is approval of Public Works Finance Committee July 23rd, 2018 minutes.
I'd move to approve those as presented.
I will second.
Okay, and they looked fine to me too, so we can accept them. Our second item is disbursement report for July 2018 with Sarah.
Hi there. So looking at the accounts payable report for month ending July 31, 2018, total expenditures came out to $2,600,659. Our largest expenditure was payroll, which was $1,106,210. There was a few large purchases that I want to point out. We did purchase the Magyar building, which came out to $423,979. We purchased a forklift for $73,000. We had the White Avenue water main replacement. That was one payment of $175,504.62, and then a payment towards the 1912 Center re-roofing, and that came in at $147,568. The rest of the payments were more of our normal monthly payment processes, and those were the largest ones to speak of. So,
And I'm glad that you pointed out the large expenditure for the 1912 Center roof, and they are happy to be done.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's really good news. Yeah,
They have the skylights? They didn't have the
That'll
skylights.
come next month.
yeah. Do you have anything else?
I sent an email out on that, had a photo of it.
Any questions or anything?
Oh, no.
That's good. Approve the disbursement report for the
Yes, I-
consent agenda.
Okay, we shall do that. We need the pen.
Just sign.
It's got the same thing, so I guess I'll put mine away.
You have to check those out.
Yeah,
They usually have the little flowers on them though, so you don't take them.
That's right. Something really big and gaudy or heavy.
Yeah.
you're not going anywhere, right? We got open budget next.
Yep. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. Item 3 is open budget for fiscal year 2017-2018, excuse me. Gary and Sarah, it looks like you're going to present.
Yes, thank you. This agenda item has to do with an open budget process. As you know, we do as good a job of budgeting as we can, but Idaho code requires that if we receive extraordinary expenditures or receive extraordinary revenues or make extraordinary expenditures in excess of the appropriation, that we then come back to council and request that that budget be opened. It has to be opened in the same way that what you're doing is actually amending the appropriation ordinance that was passed last August 2017. So this is more or less an adjustment of that. What we do, if we ever are going to exceed the appropriation, either in revenues or expenditures, we bring that to council throughout the year, telling the council that we're looking for your guidance now to either receive the revenues or make the expenditures, and then we will run it through the open budget process, which we run once a year, typically the council meeting after the annual appropriation ordinance, which we just did on August 6th. So in this case, Sarah's done a very nice job on the memo. You can see what the expenditures are, the adjustments. You've got $10,000 of grant funds for the child passenger seats, safety seats, and there is also a expenditure of those funds as well. Street fund, we received $42,100 for emergency repair response efforts for winter weather impacts. Recreation and culture fund, we had $13,806 for the public art project. We also had a anticipated donation of $3,806 in the fleet fund. Because of that circumstance, recall with the new tariffs, we had funds that we had accumulated for the next fire truck purchase, and we were able to obtain a CDBG grant, which had not been anticipated when we prepared the 2018 budget. So that went over in the fleet fund as well. Information systems, $98,519, was because we were unable to make expenditure of those funds in FY17. So the funds were accumulated and expended in FY18. Capital projects are the main. If you look at those, you've got 3rd Street corridor improvements, grant revenues of $250,000, as well as multimodal improvements for $178,700. And we had about $34,650 that we transferred out of the capital project beginning fund balance in order to get those projects completed. We also received pavement management slurry seal projects. That was the surplus eliminator funds that came out in the amount of $477,450. We also had the 1912 Center re-roof project, which we just talked about, had been budgeted at $266,560. Heart of the Arts put $64,300 toward that project. And so because it was anticipated that it would be constructed in 17 and was not, you recall that was done after the last budget had been approved, that those funds were accumulated. In other words, they were carried over into the following year, and we need an appropriation so that those funds can be paid now. Last thing had to do with Parks and Rec for playgrounds. There were some Hamilton funds in the amount of $23,503, which was transferred from the Hamilton Fund, beginning fund balance. We also had some donations from Bill Parks and the Moscow High School Buddy Club, and then $48,000 of that original $102,303 was transferred out of capital projects for the balance of that project. Totally, it comes to $2 million. Yeah, $2,019,967. And again, this is to both receive unanticipated revenues and expend funds that had not previously been appropriated.
And then all of this goes on to, at a public hearing.
Yes, what happens is it was advertised last Saturday, I believe, and it will come again, published again this Saturday. It's a public hearing. We'll run it exactly the same way we ran the appropriation ordinance on August 6th.
Is the $53,000 overrun on the skylights on the 1912, is that included in that? The Heart of the Arts is picking up that? Or is that?
Yeah, the Heart of the Arts had a donation that totaled that expense overrun, correct.
Because that's a different number than the
That is,
actual skylight over.
because they had made 2 donations, and so the total, I think, was
64,300.
and so, yes.
Cool.
So be happy to answer any further questions.
I just think it's nice to note all the grant applications that come through that help the city be able to do the things that they want to do. So, kudos to staff for continuing to look and write and get all those grants. That makes a big difference.
Thank you. I will pass that on.
Please do.
We should move this forward for the public hearing on the
Yeah,
20th.
on August 20th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Let me take the hand up.
All right, our 4th item is single stream curbside recycling program modification. Hi, Tim. You have a long document that you sent us.
I'm here to speak a little bit about our single stream recycling program. I'd like to read to you a little bit of background. For the last several decades, China has served as the end market for roughly half of the world's recyclables. Beginning in July of 2017, the Chinese government imposed new regulations known as the National Sword 2017 and Blue Sky 2018, which severely restricts the import of low-grade and contaminated recyclables. These new policies include a 0.5% allowable contamination rate, which will be very difficult, if not impossible, to reach. The new restrictions have caused worldwide impacts to the recycling markets. The West Coast, where much of Moscow's recycling is marketed, has been particularly impacted due to the reliance of these Chinese markets. These restrictions have effectively flooded the domestic markets and driven the recycling material markets to historic lows. In some cases, the material recovery facilities, or MRFs, are increasing their processing fees. They're having to slow down the throughput and hiring more staff for additional shifts in an effort to meet these new goals or standards that were put on by China. Many MRFs are also charging exorbitant fees for low-grade materials that in many cases are ending up in landfills. These low-grade materials are collected in local single-stream programs and sent to these MRFs with the expectation of being recycled, but ultimately they're being landfilled due to the lack of domestic markets. The cost to the city of Moscow for collecting these low-grade recyclables, which at one time generated revenue, has increased to over $200 per ton, roughly 4 times more than had they been disposed of at the local level. Moscow Recycling has just recently received notice with no warning that Republic Services, our current MRF provider, is raising single-stream processing fees from $77 per ton to $95 per ton, and also indicated that we should expect another rate hike of over $100 by September. To maintain the economic viability of the single-stream recycling program in Moscow, we must adapt to these dramatic shifts to the world and domestic markets. Staff is seeking City Council authorization to make modifications to our single-stream recycling program here in Moscow. Immediate and necessary changes will include concentrating our focus on collecting higher quality marketable materials rather than expanded lists of marginal low-grade and difficult to market materials. Staff is proposing to scale back the acceptable items that we currently accept by eliminating some plastics, the codes 3 through 7. All plastic bags, aluminum foil and foil trays, pots and pans, shredded paper, and aseptic packaging commonly used for juice and broth. Some of those items we'll still be able to continue to collect down at the recycling center. We just want to get them out of our single stream. LSI's indicated that the big one is the 3 through 7 plastics, and we can talk more about that after the presentation. We'll talk about this other item that was included in your packet from the Washington State Department of Ecology, that they've come up with best management practices. Changes of this level will require an extensive education effort, and staff has been meeting with LSI Moscow Recycling regarding this education effort. We plan to assemble an information packet to be delivered door to door by LSI and Moscow Recycling staff to all Moscow utility customers. This effort also will allow LSI and Moscow Recycling staff to speak directly with many of our customers to explain the changes and answer any questions that they may have. LSI and Moscow Recycling Outreach Coordinator will also make a presence at the Farmers Market as well as the Latah County Fair to further educate interested customers of these changes. Staff is or will prepare an article explaining the changes for the fall edition of the Talk and Trash newsletter to be distributed in September, and we would include information in an upcoming utility bill insert as well. LSI plans to also paint over the existing placard listing the current acceptable items on the lids of the single-stream recycling carts to assist in lessening the confusion. Right now we have a list that's kind of a placard that's embedded on the lid. It's more of a generalized list, but there are still some items on there that we just thought, it'd just be better to start over anew if we choose to go this direction. Staff has also been working closely with LSI and Moscow Recycling to explore alternative MRF options from what are currently being used. There are a number of different MRFs operating in the Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, Vancouver, and Spokane areas. We will be monitoring the MRF rates on a monthly basis in an effort to secure the most favorable rates for Moscow. The MRF processing rates and commodity markets have been somewhat of a moving target, and by most predictions will remain that way for the foreseeable future. By implementing and eliminating some of these commodities mentioned above, the single-stream recycling, it will afford Moscow better rates from the MRFs that we have spoken to. When the MRFs do a bale break and a waste characterization of these materials, the least amount of these low-grade materials and contamination in there offers us the best market prices back. So with that, I'd be happy to discuss further, ask any questions. As I mentioned, I received this best management practices for commingled residential recycling. The state of Washington has been studying single-stream programs for years, and I thought that document was real good and kind of explained the situation probably better so than I can, but
I wanted you to take the time and highlight it. I think a lot of people had so many questions about this, and I think it's very valuable because it's such a huge change and shift. So please, the things that you think that we need to know most, please highlight and take us there.
in the best management practices. A lot of it gives the same type of background, but they talk about, about municipalities in response to the dramatic shift in markets. Local municipalities should reconsider what is being accepted in their curbside programs, and their big focus is on high-quality materials instead of large quantities of the marginal materials like I spoke to in the previous reading there. They give a list of items that should not be accepted in single stream programs, and they talk about why. And the other thing that I mentioned, some of the items that we talked about scaling back, they amount to less than 4% of the total single stream.
What we can.
What we're currently accepting, they're less than 4% of the total tonnage that we take in. But those plastics are the big one, We thought it was great that they could take so many plastics in the beginning, and now we're finding that a lot of those lower end grade plastics are being landfilled, which we don't want that.
Where are they being landfilled, Tim?
The ones from Republic are being landfilled at their own landfill down on the Rebenko site down on the Columbia River, one of the 3 big regional landfills down there.
Now, the impact of that is, as they're taken in the single stream recycling, there is a fee being paid to the MRF for taking the tonnages that come in. They separate the stuff that they can't recycle, put it into their waste stream, and I believe the per ton cost was $120
$120 a ton for all residues that need to be
whereas
disposed of.
we can landfill, our current rate is just over $50.
Just around, just over
So
50.
we're already paying a fee for them to deal with it because we think it's recyclable. They're taking it out of their recycling stream, putting it in their waste stream, and we're paying roughly 2.5 times what we would pay to landfill it here. So it's just costing us a bunch of money. Our waste is being landfilled through Republic's waste stream when we could do it ourselves at a much better savings to our ratepayers.
So do they take the low-grade recyclables out? That's what they're pulling out of there? I mean, including the things that aren't recyclable at all, but.
Correct.
As Tim noted in his memo, what they do is they get these bales of recyclable materials. They take the single stream bale, send it over. They have staff over there that breaks those bales open and they sort it. And whatever they can't have a market for, they put in their landfill, and we get charged for whatever it costs to landfill that.
And what they do is they do a waste characterization of usually a couple of sample bales from a full semi-load that could have 35 or 40 bales on it. And then they do a waste characterization, and they figure that that's a pretty good idea of what the rest of that load is. And then you get the revenue based on current market prices, and a lot of these current market prices are also in the negative. So we're paying to ship it over there, we're paying to have it separated, and we're paying to get rid of it over there. Not all of it's getting landfilled, but some of it is that we know of.
Okay, so I just want to back up a little because this is so much new information for most people. And there, in the memo that you sent us, there's the list of the questions to ask, deciding your acceptance list, which you've already decided. Yeah. And then it goes further to explain why certain things are accepted and certain things aren't. It'd be nice if you could help.
Sure.
You could start
Sure.
the education process now.
And some of the list on the best management practices include paper. Obviously, there will always be a market for pulp and paper and that type of thing. Again, and that should be kept clean and dry. Shredded paper, we don't want to take in the single stream anymore, just simply, it's still an acceptable item at the MRF we're using, but most MRFs won't accept it because even though it is in a bag, those bags get broke when they get baled. That shredded paper just infiltrates everything else, and at that point, it becomes very difficult to separate. So that was the reason for the shredded paper. Corrugated cardboard, obviously, that's a good one to keep. It's compatible with commingled collection and processing systems. And there's generally always been a market for cardboard, just because it's used primarily for shipping most materials that most folks order. Plastic bottles 1 and 2, what we'd like to do is simple this down to containers, bottles, or drinking containers that have screw on and off lids, and that will limit most of the other low-grade plastics out of the mix. Bottles or jugs are typically 1s or 2s. And there's still good markets for 1s and 2 plastics. And again, they say refer to the shape or bottle or jug to determine if the item is recyclable instead of relying on the resin number, and most bottles or jugs are either 1s or 2s.
The aluminum.
Steel and aluminum, those are good to accept. They're also compatible with commingled collection and processing systems, and there tends to still be a good market for aluminum and the tin cans.
But aluminum was interesting because you don't want to include aluminum foil.
Aluminum foil and aluminum trays tend to be tied to food, and they also melt at a lower temperature than the cans do, and that's the reason for that. We can go through some of the items that they list here as far as not including in your commingled stream, and they talk about plastic bags and film. Obviously now we're able to take the one-use plastic grocery bags as long as they're bagged within a bag and, they're not just in there loose. But those are really a MRF's nightmare, those bags. They tangle up equipment, they block sensors, they're a mess. And weight-wise, they just don't weigh anything. It takes so much of them to do anything with.
Like the cardboard for a pizza box. Don't do that.
Cardboard and pizza boxes shouldn't be going in there now.
Anyway,
Anything
but
that comes
people do
in
because it's
contact with
cardboard,
food
right.
tends to contaminate the load, and that material can cross-contaminate other materials as well. I talked a little bit about the shredded paper, but they say that shredded paper falls through the processing system at the MRF and ends up as garbage. Shredded paper's pretty easy to deal with as long as you get it at the source and you can control where it goes. There are a lot of office shredding companies that come down and do business. They do our shred day every year. They do some of the bigger office buildings and such that have a lot of materials that need to be shredded. So there's still a market for that. We just don't want it in the single stream. Pizza boxes, like you mentioned. Wet cardboard and paper can be an issue too. Wet paper and cardboard can mold and dry into hard, unrecyclable blocks of fiber. Water and moisture is considered a contaminant in single-stream recycling. Plastic cups, trays, and clamshells. Plastic drinking cups, trays, and clamshells are easily flattened in the collection and processing system, ending up mixed in with paper and not recycled. They often are contaminated with food. And different plastic grades melt at different temperatures. In addition, they have often added stickers that are difficult. It's the lower grade recycling, but the West Coast was really hit by this because of a lot of our material.
You would potentially continue to collect the low grade at the recycling center itself?
Not the plastics.
Okay.
I was, some of the items I talked about, I think they still wanted to collect pots and pans. Shredded paper. The aseptic packaging, there's some of it out there, but there's not a lot. But that's kind of the cardboard, fibery, waxy looking box containers that you might find a milk chug or a juice or a broth or something like that. And a lot of those are also, they've got multiple materials in them. Some of them have plastics, and it's just not a very good thing to recycle, and it's hard in a single stream program to deal with that kind of material. But again, I just want to keep the program adaptable and keep it economically viable to continue what we're doing, because it has been quite a successful program, and I think the customers really like it, the residents really like it, but it's just, some things you're dealt and you just have to deal with.
Well, and the community was doing well with the education. We weren't contaminating, so what we were already doing a good job.
And it
that
started
way.
off, we started off in the beginning where we were just below 4%, which is phenomenal. Anything under 10% is good. We requested another bail break here when we got these new prices, and we found we were up around the 9% now. And that's part of the problem with expanded lists, is people start getting more and more creative, and they want to recycle, they want to do the right thing, but oftentimes it's not, and it kind of it backfires a little bit once it gets to the MRF, and that's.
Yeah, I'm even with the egg cartons and the berry cartons on here too. Most people don't think about that as being something that can contaminate, because they see it as cardboard first.
Right.
So, yeah, it was a very intense document because it was broken down in parts, and so that helped a good education. And then, is this the piece that you're going to use to put into smaller bite-size pieces for the
education
Yeah.
effort? LSI has actually hired a new outreach person that came to us from the U of I. She worked at the Sustainability Center there, and she's very eager to get out there, but we're actually making up new placards. It's basically 3 categories, and it will show the material that will be acceptable, and if it's not one of these 3, it goes out. Pretty straightforward. We're looking at some brochures that Boise's done in the past. Basically, everybody's adapting to this now the same way that we are trying to do this.
So do you think that people are going to be concerned that their regular waste stream's going to increase?
It may some, and if they are concerned, again, they need to be cognizant about what they're purchasing if that's a huge concern for them. Like I said, the materials that we're cutting out from the single stream amounts to less than 5%, but it contaminates a whole heck of a lot more once it's in there.
Have you heard that ad that is happening over in Pullman? It tells the story of a bottle that contaminates the stream. It does it like a children's story. It's on the radio.
I haven't heard it.
And it does the whole thing about that it gets flattened, and it had like some juice or milk in it, and then it contaminated the ton, and then they thought they were going to be able to send the ton of recyclables, but they couldn't, so then they had to landfill it. So that was kind of interesting to hear trying to get the story out of how we're going to have to change.
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure I got, so there will be the things that will continue to be single stream recycling, and then there will be some items that will just be landfill now, and there will be some that could still be brought to the recycling center?
Correct,
But
correct,
those ones will not be curbside pickup, like in a separate container like it used to be?
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
so the the
And
pickup will just be the
again,
things that are
if
single stream.
council authorizes staff to move forward with this, we'll be putting together a whole new education program, new pamphlets, new lists of acceptable commodities, and basically doing a door-to-door with Moscow Recycling and
Of course,
LSI.
people are going to be concerned, how's it going to impact them cost-wise?
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a change there?
I would think that it would save them money based on what we're paying the MRF to dispose of that material now.
And the things that you recommend continuing to accept just at the recycling center will be things that you have an end source for?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And this is something that we'll continue to look at, and likely it won't be the last time you hear from me on this
It's the
subject.
beginning,
But, you know, for now, I think this is a pretty conservative way to just kind of ease back, but, you know, it's going to take considerable effort to educate folks on this, because, you know, it's a change, and
How often do they do that assessment?
they typically do it a couple times a year, or you can request it. Again, what we'd like to do is go through this process, go through the education effort, and then really start shopping to the different MRFs, because we've dealt with one since the program started, and we've talked to a number of them, and they all said, you know, if you're going to be taking out plastics and doing a big education effort, let that run its course for a month or two, because it's not going to happen overnight, and then go in, and if we try a new MRF when they're busting open our bales, if, you know, if they're nice and clean, we're going to obviously get better rates back.
It would be, I think it would be kind of motivating maybe to report back when we get those. You know, what was
Absolutely.
our
Oh, sure.
contamination rate, and kind
Sure.
of collectively, can we
Sure.
do better? You know, the same way when we now get the water comparison consumption as an individual, it's a little bit motivating to compare what you did last year.
Right.
As far as this is gonna impact the sanitation study that you're doing, obviously.
Yes.
Because it's changing how we're gonna do this whole thing, and it's gonna impact whether or not we decide to have our own MRF. And whether we do a waste to energy thing, or, you know, how can we most economically and ecologically deal with this? And landfill as little as possible.
Right.
So that's part of does that change the way that's being
And
looked at?
we
or-
just met with the advisory group last week, and that was one of the larger tasks on that study, was that MRF feasibility study. And we got some good information out of it. However, I think we're going to need more tonnage, or at least all or most of the Quad Cities area to really make that economically viable. We're just not big enough, and we don't have enough tonnage to, I mean, I'm definitely going to keep looking at a local MRF, because I still think it can be done despite what the study says, but I've got to believe what the study says at this point. I can't believe that something can't be built to scale.
How many are on the advisory committee, and when will you be meeting again?
We just met last Wednesday, I believe, or Thursday. There are 2 more tasks left, and then we'll be doing a public open house, I believe, and then hopefully later that week, we'll be doing a workshop for the full council. We're looking October-ish now. We'll meet with the AG group one more time prior to that, though.
And then,
We're just now at the point where we're looking at a prototypical type design and what kind of footprint that might take up as far as land, and how best to lay it out, but it's real general. It won't be,
commercial will just change at the same time that residential does?
Yes.
In the same
everything
rules,
will
everything is
change
the
at the
same?
same time, yeah.
And how many on the advisory committee?
I think we've got about 8 or 9.
Okay. If anybody once they get this information and is interested, they can contact you.
Sure. Sure.
and attend the next thing. Okay. Yeah, big, huge change.
We've got 3 of the members of that AG group are also on the Sustainable Environment Committee as well. So we're kind of working together with them. Gina's on the committee. Got some LSI folks. We've got Amanda from up at the county and
Yeah.
3 or 4 or 5 maybe citizens on it. So, yeah, it's a pretty well-rounded group.
Yeah, is there anything else?
What do you think about putting that document on the website? I mean, it's really good.
The best management practices. I really like that paper, and it's definitely going to be a part of the education effort. It may even become part of the packet.
Yeah.
Even though it's a Washington document, I think it really lays it out nicely for, a person to just sit down, and it's not like reading a book, but it really lays it out nicely.
I agree. Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, ma'am.
Anything else?
I think we should authorize this to move forward and be presented at the next council meeting, and
And per your request, do you want to put it on the website? Is that something you want to go ahead and do, or do you want to wait till?
If we get authorization to move forward from council, I'll just say that it's going to be used.
Okay. Yeah.
We can put it on the website as well as make it part of the packet and, some of those things that are gonna be door hung, door to door, so.
Okay.
We don't wanna give people too much, but I really like that document, and that's why I put it in your packet,
Yeah.
because I just,
Yeah.
And for those people that do want more, to be able to
Sure.
direct them someplace where they can find
Sure.
a little more detail, I
Sure.
think would be great.
So it sounds like you are authorized to modify the single-stream curbside recycling program.
all right, thank
You're
you.
I think we
recommending.
have to send it to council.
Yeah, but from the committee, we're moving to authorize you to, we're
recommending.
agreeing with you to recommend, to move it on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Item 5775, Indian Hills Drive Lot Line Adjustment with Michael. Do you feel like they can? Oh, okay. Hi.
Well, I just want to start off by introducing a new planner in our department, Leah Carlson. I think
Hi.
a few of you already met her, but she'll be pretty much taking over lot line adjustments, lot divisions. So just wanted her to attend and get introduced to everybody.
Great, thank you, welcome.
Nice to meet you. Welcome.
So the item before you today is a lot line adjustment at Indian Hills Drive, 775. These are the two contiguous parcels here outlined in red at the center of your screen. You can see Indian Hills Drive, which heads east and west. Here, this is primarily single-family residential area with many cul-de-sacs in the Indian Hills Drive area. You can see Campus Crest, which is the Grove development to the southwest of your screen. And as you transition to the north, it transitions into two-family and multifamily dwellings. Just looking at the zoning in the area, its subject property is R1, which is a low-density, single-family residential zone. To the south, this actually hasn't been updated. It's currently a combination of R2, which is single-family, and R3. That was a recent subdivision and rezone that was approved to the south with Indian Hills 9th Edition. Campus Crest is multifamily, which is the blue R4 zone to the southwest. Then you have some pockets of R4, R3, and R2 to the north and northeast. So looking at a closer view of these two parcels, the westerly one, which is Lot 8, which is 13,343 square feet in size. Lot 9 to the east is 12,112 square feet in size. This would be the proposed adjustment. So right now you have the contiguous line here running down the middle. The proposal would be to adjust this common lot line to this configuration, and you can see there's an existing retaining wall that was built, previously built on this property across both of these properties that was intended to accommodate a building site and to level out the property. And so that's the purpose for the lot line adjustment, is to get two building sites out of these two parcels whereas the way it currently exists in the existing configuration, it'd be hard to build on this lot just because of the location of the retaining wall. So that's really the purpose for this adjustment. So R1, minimum lot width is 80 feet and minimum lot area is 9,600 square feet, which both of these parcels meet. The resultant parcel for Lot 9 results in 9,631 square feet. And then the larger parcel, Parcel 8, is 15,826 square feet in size. So with that, staff recommends approval of lot line adjustment request with no conditions. And I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you have.
I don't have any questions.
Seems like a practical solution to a problem
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm fine with that, moving forward.
Consent agenda, I would say.
Yes. So we'll put that on consent agenda. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I wanted to ask a question just so you could answer something. Did you draw the map? Yeah. All right, number 7, SCADA replacement project FY 2017, change order number 1, Les, or Mike, sorry. Oh, sorry, miss number 6, ITD 5339, capital grant project funding agreement, time extensions, Elisa. Hi.
Good afternoon. Before you today, I'm bringing forth updates to 2 agreements to existing projects that have been with us for a few years now. We wrote these grants in 2015, I think it was, and there was several transitions of staffing at ITD in the interim of us actually getting an original contract to the projects. Both of these have been before you recently. One of them for the bus shelter and bike shelter installations. The contract for McCall Classic Construction was awarded recently. And then the other project is we'll be purchasing materials to install bike sharrows and signage. And so we're just asking for an additional time extension so that we can get them completed this year. And the original date had been to end the projects at September 30th, 2018. One of our other concerns that has since been resolved is that we were waiting for environmental approval on 2 of the sidewalk installations from FTA, and that has since been received, so we're okay to move forward there. So it's basically just accommodating the construction timelines and the installation of the signage and sharrows so that we can complete the project.
I don't have any
Fine
questions.
with me. Want to get the project completed.
Yes. So our request is to approve the grant funding agreements for the bike and bus shelters and the bike amenities. And within our packet, we have an attachment A and also a new agreement that has extended the project end date to December 31st, 2018. And both of those would need to be executed by the mayor upon council approval.
Okay. I don't think we have any questions here.
Do you want to send that to consent agenda?
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Item 7, Les, SCADA replacement project FY 2017, change order number 1. Good afternoon.
Well, the SCADA project has been ongoing for some time. This is a fairly large effort to completely replace, as much as we possibly can, the system that creates the communication between the operating computer systems for our utilities and all of those remote locations throughout the community. So there are a lot of parts to this, as you can imagine. It's both for water and sewer, so every individual site located within this system, whether it's a booster station for water, a lift station for sewer, control systems on the wells, on the reservoirs, all of those things are all interconnected through a SCADA system. So it deals with the communication and the operation of all those various pieces, but it also then gathers data about that operation and keeps a history of all of that operation. So it's something that is very important in the system. We've had a contract in place where they've been working on that for some time. As we have gone through the process, what we found, and the reason this change order is before you, was that we had anticipated certain costs going into the project. And when we did the bid last year, those costs that came in from the contractor were very favorable. In anticipation of higher costs, though, when we put the project out in the street, we had reduced some quantities of things. We just didn't think we were going to be able to afford to do them. As we've gone forward and we received favorable pricing, we started looking at those items that had been deleted, if you will, the quantities reduced, and found that we truly did still need to do those. And so we've worked with the contractor on the pricing to do that very work. This change order number one just captures that work, and essentially we're looking at increased quantities of things that we were already doing in the base contract. It's just more of them. So for instance, there might have been 5 control panels in the system, and we're putting in 8, something to that effect. So that type of work. So essentially that's what is with change order number one. It would add to the original contract amount. And that number just escaped me. It's in here. I just lost it.
$182,000 number?
No, there's a 300.
The original bid was $357,000.
With a 10.
Yeah, there we go. And the change order number one is $38,977.38, which exceeds the 10% pre-authorization authority that is given by the council to staff. So that's why you're seeing this change order before you today.
Okay.
If I may.
Yes.
This has been reviewed by the legal department, and it's within the acceptable guidelines for extending a contract by change order.
Yeah, it looks like it still would come well under the original engineer's estimated cost before those, and that was before the items were deleted?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. The original contract amount, the 357, was well below the, I think it was 483,000. That was the engineer's estimate. So quite a bit of room there, and again, we're still well below that figure.
Seems like it's an improvement in the whole system monitoring software, so it's well worth it, I think.
So then we'll just move it on to city council agenda.
Consent as well?
I'm okay with consent.
I think so.
Yeah, consent agenda then.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thanks. And then our report is on Third Street Quarter status.
Yeah. We thought it would be helpful to
Catch us
bring
up.
a quick report, if you will, on how things are proceeding along the way. I know there have been some questions floating around out there about what's happening, when and where, and when's it all going to come together, all those kind of things. So we thought it'd be beneficial to have some discussion today about the various parts and pieces, because there are a lot of moving parts in this, as I have said before. So to start with, just a quick overview. If you'll recall, the project components within Plan C, the original Plan C, and you've seen all of these before, but essentially dealing with speed limits, the lighted school zones for the speed limit signs, the raised pedestrian crossings, things of that nature. So they're all in this column here under Plan C. And then when Alta did the review for us and they came back with recommendations, that's represented in the second column. Some things that were not in the original plan showed up in Alta's recommendation, like the hawk signal for the pedestrian bike crossing at Mountain View Road. And council did authorize moving forward with including that in the system under the revised plan, the Alta plan, if you will. The remainder of the items included the four-way stops at Hayes and Blaine intersections with 3rd, the center medians near Jefferson and west of the Mountain View Road intersection, completion of all the sidewalks on both sides of the corridor, And then the Alta plan recommended some changes at the transit stop there in front of the high school. And again, that was approved by the council to move forward. And then ultimately the installation of the separated, two-way separated bike lanes. All right, so to back up to the beginning of that, this is where we are today. So with the speed limits, we will be posting the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit from one end to the other. And that should occur shortly, as in this month. Our intent is to try to have as much of this in place that we can before the road reopens. Obviously, there's 2 construction projects going out there right now, so as much as we can, we're attempting some of these things while that traffic is off of the street. So the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit would be an underway, pending soon implementation. The lighted school zone signs are the first of a number of items that are in the phase, we're calling it the 3rd Street Multimodal Improvements Phase 1 project. And that project is out to bid. The bids are due tomorrow, and we'll have bid opening tomorrow afternoon. That project will then come to City Council directly for next Monday's council meeting for award. But within that are a number of things, which includes the installation of the lighted school zone speed limit signs on those speed signs at both the high school speed zone and the Lena Whitmore speed zone, as well as the installation of the Hawk pedestrian signal out at Mountain View Road. Purchase of the materials from that has already occurred. That was done prior to the project put out to bid, which included the installation only. The raised pedestrian crossing is not part of that project, but it is already under construction and is nearly complete. You probably noticed the work out there last week. They made great progress on getting that well on its way. So that's the Adams crossing shown as underway. Our intent is to have that done and open and restriped. We have to restripe that section of street as well prior to the opening of school. The other 2 raised crossings at this point are in the future in that they are actually in the bid package that is out right now for Phase 1 of the multimodal improvements. They are shown as add alternates. They're there in that we did not yet have council approval to remove them from the project, but there's been discussion along that line of thought that perhaps they would be best deferred until a future date. And the reason for that primarily is the fact that their main purpose at Monroe and Cleveland was to be part of the traffic calming associated with the anticipated impacts for increased traffic due to the construction of the multimodal bridge. Again, as we have had very high bids on the bridge a month ago and rejected those bids, and the multimodal bridge is kind of pending at this point without a set schedule, then we don't believe that there's a need to put in the traffic calming features that were meant to address that traffic impact if that traffic impact is not happening. And they can certainly be installed at a later date, is the staff's perspective, when the multimodal bridge ultimately comes to be. Right now, for me personally, I don't really believe that there is that much need for those 2 raised crossings with the existing traffic situation, and keeping in mind that there are other features out there, such as reduced lane width with the 2 bike lanes, that are going to have some traffic calming inherently within them. The Adams Street crossing is a little different, and I've been very supportive of this, I think, as most people have, in that that is a very high-use pedestrian area currently. It is also the one area of the corridor that our traffic speed studies indicated we actually had folks violating the speed limits. And so those 2 things, I think, make a very easy argument to install the raised pedestrian crossing at Adams, which of course is what we're doing. And on the second slide, the portion of that is underway in future, the intersection traffic control, again, the 4-way stops at Haynes and Blaine were primarily to deal with traffic calming and traffic management for increased traffic related to the bridge. So staff has proposed at this point that those not be installed. They again be deferred until the multimodal bridge is installed. You will see in my future X's over here a couple of asterisks, and that is to point out the fact that the Transportation Commission looked at this last week, and they recommended that those 2 four-way stops be installed now rather than at some future date. So put them into the underway category rather than the future category. So I wanted to pass that along, that was their recommendation. They believe that there were some issues out there, particularly at Hayes, that could perhaps be improved with a 4-way stop. The center medians, both of them are in that future column. The one at Jefferson, of course, would be in the second phase of our multimodal corridor improvements. So once we figure out what ITD is going to let us do to the west, then it would be bundled into that project when it goes out the door, presumably sometime this winter or next spring. The one west of Mountain View and east of Roosevelt at the moment is on a short half-block street that dead ends at the creek, so there really is no reason to install that at this point in time. Again, when the multimodal bridge goes in, that would be the time to install that median as well. The sidewalk work is in the Phase 1 improvements. The bids will open tomorrow, so all of the gaps in the sidewalk system will be closed. And then there also are some relocations of existing sidewalks where we identified problems with snow storage due to the reduced lane widths and the presence of the 2-way bike lane system. So that is all going to be completed with this project that we will award next week. The high school transit stop expansion, that was the one that Alta developed and recommended, is actually included in the Adams Street raised crossing. So it's, again, about 95% done in the field as we speak. And then the 2-way bike lanes, we are looking at probably a spring installation of those as we get the other components further along. We have looked at the possibilities of whether or not they could be done earlier or portions of them done earlier. Where could they start and stop? Some different configurations. Some possibilities there. Part of the challenge we've got is a resource issue with trying to install something like that this fall yet. And with the other construction things that are still ongoing in the corridor, it's probably still best to look for a spring installation on those. So I have those in that future column. So.
Did you end up talking about the bike lanes with transportation?
No, we did not talk about those.
Okay.
They saw this same presentation. The areas that they really spoke about were the 2 4-way stops and also the other 2 raised pedestrian crossings.
How does this, the funding for this, it seems like it would complicate things because we don't know, there's some funding coming from the grant and some funding from city money and which pieces are financed by what? And how does this, the changing and delaying and adding on of things, how does that affect that?
It complicates our life tremendously is what it does. So the last part here has to do with the Child Pedestrian Safety Grant funding, the CPS funding. So within that, we identified all of these locations where we felt there was potential to have curb bulbs or curb extensions installed. For the most part, these extend across side streets. And that was done because we originally, when we applied, we didn't know which of the plans, A, B, or C, we were going to end up with. Obviously, we ended up with C. C does not have space for curb bulbs on 3rd Street because everything is constrained by the lanes that are involved, with very few exceptions. And so this was the list, and the original Plan C and Alta plans did not include any of those. What we're currently working on is shown here in the underway column. So the ones on Polk Street, northwest, southwest corners, and Howard, northwest, southeast corners, those 4 are being done as part of the reconstruction project that's been going a couple of months with all the utilities. So those are nearing completion. The northwest corner of Blaine and the southwest corner of Blaine, southwest corner of Cleveland and southwest corner of Roosevelt and northwest corner of Mountain View are all part of the multimodal Phase 1 project that opens tomorrow. So those are all underway. We'll proceed into construction yet this year. When you look at the future column, you'll see the northwest corner, southeast corner of Jefferson. Obviously, that is dependent upon the answer from ITD, and those will be included in the phase 2 of the multimodal corridor improvements. The southwest corner of Hayes was not included at this point, and that is also the same with with the northwest corner of Cleveland and the northwest corner of Roosevelt. The southwest corner of Hayes was initially identified as an area where we could make some east-west pedestrian improvements. Part of what I've been trying to do is manage the overall cost on the project, and as we collectively decided that the addition of the Hawk signal out in Mountain View was a good idea, I had to try to find some areas where I could trim back a little bit, so that is one that I think we'll recommend not constructing at all. It was there as a benefit as it related to the end of the parking area, and it does create some east-west benefit as well. But out of all of these, that was one I was less enamored with by the time we got to that point. These might have fallen into that category as well, but they launched early because that project went out to bid much earlier in the year before all the other things have happened since. So they're already underway, if you will. The northwest corner of Cleveland and the northwest corner of Cleveland particularly had to do with the raised pedestrian crosswalk. So if, again, in the future, if we install that raised pedestrian walk, we'd probably look at that northwest corner of Cleveland in conjunction with that. The northwest corner of Roosevelt was pretty much a standalone on that side. We did not include those on the northwest that did not have sidewalk work attached to them today. When you see the things like the southwest of Roosevelt, you might think, well, why are you doing that one? Well, it's because we're building new sidewalk right up to that corner. So we kind of need to build the curb bulb with it. And so that's how we got to that determination. And then, of course, the corner of Main Street, again, it would be part of Phase 2 if ITD allows us to go around the corner up to 2nd Street. So, kind of a long answer, Jim, to your question, but the CPS money, the $250,000 grant, will be expended through the Adams Street Crossing project and the Phase 1 project of the multimodal improvements with all that sidewalk work and these curb bulbs that are within that, the Hawk signal, those types of things, the lighting on the school zones. All of those things are included and would be eligible under the Hawk or under the CPS monies. So we will more than expend the $250,000 grant. On top of that, then there will be city money going into the remainder of those jobs, and then all of these future projects as we move into Phase 2, plus the bike way installation. All of those things would then be city funds.
So all of the CPS grant will be expended in Phase 1, but it will not cover all of Phase 1.
It will not. Between Adams and Phase 1, we will exceed the $250,000 grant. And we'll see what the bids are in Phase 1. We don't know yet.
Joanne, you have a question?
You're going to have to come up here.
Come on
Jimmy.
up and then, so we can hear your question.
My first question, which I've been emailing but nobody answered, when you receive a grant, because it seems different from the arts system, when you receive a grant and you say, we're going to do A, B, C, D, and you get the money, don't you have to do A, B, C, D? Because we're saying, oh, we're not doing this now and we're not doing this.
It depends on the particular grant itself. Elisa can come up and talk if she wants. But the grant usually has parameters, and there may be elements that you have to do because perhaps that was critical to your application. But there are situations where there's some flexibility within, and Elisa does a great job of calling up the granting agency and saying, okay, these are some changes because of perhaps the amount of cost, something's changed in the field. Could we do something different? And if it falls within the grants, they give permission, and we're able to go ahead with that. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Did we do that for this grant?
And Les can also speak to this, but this grant in particular fell under the surplus eliminator money. And it was considered a maintenance and improvement for pedestrian safety. And within that application, we did not have to specifically name certain things that we were going to do. We discussed the corridor and potential improvements. And within that project, there were several items that were listed where we would do bulbs and extensions within the corridor. So we did not name out streets and different specific improvements to each street. It was a corridor improvement for pedestrian safety, child pedestrian safety, and so we're still falling within those guidelines.
But in that grant, you said one of the things we need for safety are these raised crosswalks. You never mentioned traffic calming. I've read the grant. I don't see the words traffic calming. I saw child pedestrian safety. And I'm especially concerned at the one at Monroe because I live a block away and I know how many children cross or try to cross at Monroe. You specifically said this is a safety concern. Now we're saying, well, no, it's really just a traffic calming, and if we don't build a bridge, we don't need the raised crosswalk. Or we're going to do it sometime in the future. That's my concern. I think it's needed now, just like the one at the high school. There's a group of students that have to cross Monroe to get to a bus stop. They're the students that go to the Palouse Prairie School. And there's difficulty in getting across there. I think we need the raised crosswalk. And since it was in the grant as a safety consideration, I think it's a legitimate thing to be in the bid.
If I may follow up, the grant gave general concepts of the type of things that we would be doing within the corridor as a whole to try to address and improve pedestrian safety. Obviously, at that point, we didn't know what we were going to end up with because we were still going through the selection process and all the different scenarios, A, B, and C. If we had chosen A and B, then we would have been doing a lot of curb bulbs in 3rd Street and not so much on the side streets. And so we've anticipated that things would vary a little bit as we went along. All of the things that we've talked about that we're proceeding with were contemplated as things that would improve pedestrian safety for children in the corridor, and I still think that is indeed the case. Some of those perhaps are deferred, as we've suggested here, and at times when the traffic volumes change, then I think the impact and the value of those types of improvements, such as those other raised crossings, will become much more apparent than they are today. And so that's, the grant was prefaced on the idea that that bridge was going in, and that with that change in traffic, there was more of a need to do things within the corridor. And with that not happening right now, then that need has not yet established itself in every situation. I think when the bridge is installed at a future date, then yes, it will probably get back to that point that yes, all of those things that we identified previously should be installed for all of those very reasons. So I'm comfortable with what we're doing in terms of working within the parameters of the grant, what we anticipated we'd be doing. A lot of the work has to do with the east-west corridor route with the curb bulbs and the sidewalks that were anticipated as we've shown here. And so I'm comfortable that we're well within the intention of the grant and the grant agency that awarded it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've all looked at the budget of the grant, and there were 3 crosswalks, raised crosswalks included in the budget, as there were 14 bulb outs. And I feel like the bulb outs are helping students cross east-west, but they're not helping people go across north-south across 3rd Street. There's a lot of traffic on 3rd, even without the bridge. I think if you think about the safety of the children, and that's what we're worrying about, you would give a second thought to raise crosswalks. That's the point I'd like to make.
And thank you for making that point. And I don't think that hasn't been considered. I think it's just dealing with what we have and where we're going and what's the best use of the funds that we have at the time. I think that's in like all projects, they're fluid in trying to figure these things out. So I also appreciate that you have emailed your concerns.
Right.
and
Well,
coming to the committee meeting.
And
too.
you're setting your priorities one way instead of, east-west instead of north-south, is the way I feel.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I think there's still some things that are up in the air in terms of how Third Street's gonna look when we get the two-way bike lane in there and how that will affect
Crossing.
the ability to cross the street, and it will narrow the street, and the traffic will be slower then. So I think the prioritization of how things are progressing is correct for a situation where we're not having a vehicular bridge, and that at some point when that happens, those things will become more prevalent and probably be a higher priority. But I think the way it's done now is prioritizes it in a reasonable fashion.
But your questions continue to help people understand the overall project, so that's good.
Well, and I think the critical question about the other crosswalks, for example, the one at Monroe, really comes down to, is it needed now? And do we have some data to make the determination that it's not needed now? Do we need to gather some data to know that? Is it just a feeling that it's not needed? I mean, that's, clearly everything fits within the grant. That's, not the question, but do we need that crosswalk now?
You know, I can't hand you a bunch of numbers that say volume here, volume there. And, you know, what we do know is that the speed was an issue around the high school, as I mentioned before. We also know that we're modifying the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit that currently is in place in the area of Monroe intersection and lowering that to 25. So that should be a benefit there as well. We do know that we're narrowing the lanes, the travel lanes there. Currently it's 30 feet with minimal parking that happens, so effectively 15-foot lanes going to 11 with curb and then raised elements on the buffer on the north side. And so I think all of those things will have an effect, and it becomes a question of how much. And I think it's appropriate to proceed with installation of all of those features, and if over time we find that there is an ongoing issue or an issue develops, as Jim was talking about, as we put all of those things in place, it may be that the crossing of Third Street becomes easier because of them. If it doesn't, or some other issue arises, we will come back and address it.
So you had mentioned a couple times about the speeds by the high school, justifying that need. Is there information about the speeds at Monroe that doesn't
Yeah,
justify
we did
it?
the entire corridor,
That's part of the
and
subcommittee work.
the speeds that were recorded at Monroe, the 85th percentile speeds were essentially at the speed limit. All right, now that's 30. That's not 25. At the high school, where it's 25, and then at times 15, we were seeing 30. People were driving that much above the speed limit. So it was much more apparent that there was a speed issue at the high school. At the other locations, the rest of the corridor, everybody essentially was working, 85th percentile speeds were meeting the posted speed limit. Now, when we somewhat artificially lower to 25 for safety and traffic calming perspectives, we may see folks violating that for a while until they get used to it. And so there's going to be some transitional time. We'll have to address that. But yeah, everywhere else in the system, the speed limits were being met. The high school was the exception.
And what about the four-way stops with the Transportation Commission, recommending them now? Is this just something we discuss at the next council meeting?
I think ultimately it would be a council decision as to whether or not you want to pursue that. Our typical process would be to go through a stop sign study to check warrants and see if they're met. I did mention that to the Transportation Commission, that's something that perhaps the council would want to have for information before tackling that particular subject, or giving direction to implement if that's the desire. I also told them that I thought it would be best to wait until after school starts so that all the traffic is back in town, because that's when you're most likely to meet a warrant. If you tried to do it now, there's no way. Neither one of those intersections would make it. Hayes, once school is back on and all the cars are back in operation, maybe would make it. I mean, we checked this periodically, and it's been a few years since the last time we didn't make warrants before, but obviously we could run it again this fall and see if that makes sense. But Blaine just doesn't have the volume, so I'd be really, truly surprised if it ever met a warrant there under the current situation. Once the bridge is in, maybe. at that point. Obviously, there's other considerations
Was
there.
the Transportation Commission kind of thinking that it'd be better to educate people, like it's one of the steps in getting people used to having a change? Is that why they were kind of recommending the four-way stops?
It was a bit of a mixed discussion. There was a motion made by one member to proceed with the raised pedestrian crossings. There was no second to that motion, so it died on the table, if you will. Then they moved on to the four-way stops, and they were generally supportive. There were 5 members out of the 9 that were there. They were generally supportive of proceeding with those four-way stops. They felt that Hayes intersection probably was about at that point anyway, reaching some concern with enough traffic on the westerly leg and then the north-south legs. It was heavy enough that they had all experienced, concerns out there. So I think that was the driver of that. With the Blaine location, it was primarily proximity to the school, which is what is on everybody's mind. Is there a safety consideration there that would perhaps override a warranted assessment to put in a four-way stop?
Well, we've never heard from the school, have we? The city?
The school district has not taken any official positions on any of this, as far as I know. We've
Or
had
even-
discussions, obviously, and, there's, depending on who you talk to at the school district, obviously, there's different opinions on all of this.
Oh, I just even meant from administration from Lena Whitmore.
They have not requested a four-way stop that I'm aware of, not to the city, at least not formally, that in any form I've seen, so.
Okay. Good.
And then the Jefferson median really necessitates being on hold until we hear from ITD.
Right.
Correct. So.
Yeah, there would be some changes in what we do there depending on where we're terminating, whether it's there or Main or Second.
And we're anticipating not knowing until the spring, so.
Well, we should know this fall, winter, and then get into a design for that piece, and I would anticipate trying to put it out in the spring for bids.
And so the most of phase 2, with the exception of some of these curb bulbs, is contingent on ITD's decision.
Yes.
Joanne, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. I think we're good. Do you have more questions?
No, I mean, there's something I want to talk about at some point about the two-way protected bike lane, but I don't think we need to do that yet, since that's a future item.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you for the update. And with that, we have no further items on our agenda, so we may adjourn. If there are no further questions. All right, we're adjourned.